Thank you for joining us for this Finding God in Video Games Ministry Spotlight. And I have a special and amazing guest today. This is Charles from Beneath the Tangles, also probably known to most of his viewers as Tweak. And I'm really, really excited to have you with us. We've never had anyone around this aspect of anime before to spotlight. So, very, very excited to learn more about Beneath the Tangles. I really want to start with just where did this concept for this becoming this large ministry that you have come from?
Yeah, no, that's that's kind of a funny story. We were sharing just real briefly before we jumped on about parenting and the kids and everything, and that's kind of where it started because I was up late at night. I had trouble getting back to sleep after the kids would wake up, and so I kind of rediscovered anime, which was something that I'd watched in kind of high school and college mostly. And also at that time I was very involved in serving at the church, and I was like, huh, is there a way to bring anime together with Christianity? And my answer was, I don't think there is. So, it was like, how does this work? And my theology hadn't really formed quite around all that yet, and how to, just as you finding God in video games, right? I think it's actually pretty natural once you get into it. You're like, oh gosh, it is all over, right? But at the time, I didn't really understand that, so I kind of went searching on the internet to see if anyone else had done this first. And what you kind of had, which is maybe kind of what maybe some of your viewers or listeners might be used to, which is seeing people kind of review, kind of anime from a Christian perspective, which is helpful. But it wasn't what I was looking for. I was already doing a little bit of blogging, and I wanted to kind of talk about faith using anime, right? To look in anime and see what I could draw out of it that would encourage me and others in our faith. So there were a couple of people out there that had done a couple pieces, I'd written a little bit about that. But no one was doing it consistently. So I was like, God, is this the space you want me to fill? And I proceeded not to hear an answer from him. I don't, I don't think I hear a lot of audible voices from God, at least in my life. I know some people do. So, thank God for them, but not for me. I was like, what I'm going to do is I think serving you is faithfulness. So let's see where this goes. And I took a few months to really just kind of figure out the space a little bit and see what people were doing when it came to anime and blogging. So, we're on a bunch of different platforms now, but we really just started as a blog. And I just want to see what was out there. I got involved in the blogging community, developed relationships with other bloggers. I even sent out a survey as we started out to say, hey, is religion any part of your life, and how so? And does it inform, your viewing habits? And just kind of gathering information, and then just seeing what kind of things would come out of me. Like, it was, the type of writing I was doing then is totally different from now because I didn't know what to do. But it really developed people. I think what people saw was initially, this guy really loves anime, so he's not just dipping a toe in our community to try to get us to church, right? Although that's what I wanted to do, but I want to share my faith. This was all missional, right? But I loved anime too, and so I was able to write about stuff, make friendships, and then it just kind of spun out from there. And years later, I can look back because at the time I was like, as I said, is this something from God or is this from me? And I feel now looking at the results is like the Holy Spirit was moving kind of despite me not knowing what I was doing. So it's been quite a ride. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot and enjoyed it.
So, where did the Beneath the Tangles name come from? I'm sure you probably mentioned this somewhere before, but like you said, you've been doing this a while. It's such a fun, like just artistic image when you say that. But where did you come up with that? I'm sure it's very personal how you came to that place.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of artistic angle because I think one thing that we really want to try to that we're working on really actively and that we've sporadically tried to focus on is the idea of not just writing about God, but trying to be God for people, trying to be Jesus for people, and that's obviously loving and serving people, but also there's this image of God's incredible, immense creativity, right? And that's part of what draws us to anime, and it's similar in video games. When you get really absorbed in a game, you're like, "Wow, this story is amazing." It's the same type of thing. And so I didn't want to be like Anime plus Christ or something like that, which in hindsight might have gotten us a lot more viewers, but it's okay. We wanted to do something a little bit different. We've connected Bible verses to that to the title beneath the tangle since then. Primarily Hebrews 12:1, which says, I'm going to read it because if I if I say it, it's going to get all mangled. But therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. So we've kind of connected that, but I mean, I just have to be honest. The original inspiration, this is a line from a Lifehouse song, and I was really into Lifehouse as a
There's
young
nothing
adult.
wrong with that.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with it. So
We all had a couple of the CDs. Anyone that says otherwise, you're born in a different generation. We all did.
that's exactly right. I mean, pretty much everyone coming out of rock at the time had some sort of Christian background, but but it was, yeah. So that's where it came from, and that's exactly it. It was like this is exactly what, even though I don't know exactly what I'm trying to do, somehow this is exactly it. Let's look at anime, and there's so many trappings that if you immediately look at it, you're like, this can't be helpful for a Christian. This is something that a Christian shouldn't be watching, and there's so many things you can count off, right? And this is shortly, I mean, this is way afterwards, but I grew up in the generation, right, where we were hearing pastors say, "Don't, Pokemon's the devil." We're, and a little bit after that, it was Harry Potter, right? So like I think the media kind of thought right away was still that anime is this evil thing, right? And it's like, well, there's elements there just like in any other media that we should avoid. There's elements that might tempt you to sin, but God is working through people, and His creativity is seen in us, and His stories in us, right? The whole thing about like that God shaped hole we have in us, right? That's also in the Japanese people creating this. There's also seeking God whether they understand it or not, right? So what can we, if we go beneath the tangles, what can we pull from that that's really, really glorifying to God and honoring to Him, and how can we pull those things out and teach people about it?
Well, then what you mentioned just makes me think of when Paul said this to the unknown God altar that you're looking at. Like
Mhm,
obviously there was he even said, I see that you are very, very religious. Like
mhm,
there was
mhm.
undercurrents in a very pagan society back then of all these things that were grasping and reaching for
Yeah,
something of substance. And they kept making more because it wasn't satisfying the need.
exactly.
Well, you know what? Let's just add another God because we don't have one for this. And now
Mhm,
I think about it, I have something I want to pray about. None of these gods do that. Let me make another one. And they just kept adding to it. And finally, they reached the point like, let's just make an all encompassing one that we don't really know what it is
mhm.
because we might have missed something. We might have offended some God if we
Yeah.
didn't make one for them.
Isn't that funny? Like that feels so still applicable to what's going on today, like with our audience, right? I mean, like there's something missing in life for a lot of otaku, for a lot of video game fans, for a lot of us nerds, right? Like actually some of us might be super well adjusted and just have an amazing life, but some of us are struggling, right? Some of us have had struggles in the past, have had maybe abuse in our past, or other kind of difficulties, and there's this active kind of search for what's going to help me, and sometimes we find it in entertainment, right? Video games and anime, right? But it ultimately doesn't prove to be enough. There's something else. Of course, it's God that we're made for and designed for, right? So that only He can fill that hole, right? But in this entertainment, we can see glimpses of the invisible God, and I think that's just so amazing.
Absolutely. And you mentioned with that how people are observing and viewing and in gaming aspect participating in some of these stories and aspects of it. Some of it is because there's a legitimate I'm missing something in my life. Like you said, like I don't have maybe a partner in life that I'm spending with. So the romantic subplot in this, I'm connecting to that for now. But there's another side of that too, where those of us like, that we're married and have children and those things, like we are still processing a lot of things, like you said, pains in our
Yeah,
past and such, that just because we already have maybe some of those trappings that one would consider to be okay, so you've successfully acquired romance, you have successfully completed the occupation mission, you think you know what you're doing with your life. There's still a part of watching a lot of these and participating in these. I'm like, oh, now I can process that feeling. Now I can
mhm.
process that emotion. It's the reason that Jesus spoke in parables. Because the
Yes.
stories, as I go through them by a lot of these incredible artists, they help me unlock, even if they're not meaning to, maybe
Mhm.
those emotions and things. Is there one that maybe you would say was just really resonating for you that helped trigger you into this as this ministered to me? It didn't mean to, but it did. This anime, this maybe even made by someone who isn't even on a parallel path to me at this moment,
Mhm.
it changed the way that my relationship with God worked and my relationship with others worked. And maybe that helped you into a place of where Beneath the Tangles maybe didn't even launch it, but really helped kind of become a catalyst for doing more with it.
Yeah, no, there've been a lot of anime like that along the way. I think one of the earlier ones that still resonates with me is a series called Clan Ad, and it's actually based on it's an adaptation of a visual novel, which is kind of halfway a game, halfway a story, where you make choices along the way and choose paths, right? So it's technically based on the game, and the main character he has he's very much the type of person to try to bring his friends together, try to help people's lives, but he has some trauma in his past. He has we don't know where his mom is. She's just not part of the story. His dad, with the stress of raising a son, has become alcoholic and abusive. Eventually goes to jail, so he has to deal with all this stuff, and it's affecting his current life too. And he starts to have loss and problems in his own life, kind of because of what his dad has gone through and done to him, and he's repeating the same patterns as his dad did. And so it's a crazy anime because the first like half of it is like a high school kind of comedy anime. The second half is about his life after high school, getting a job, getting married, having children, and it goes to this depth that we don't usually have. Well, um, I'm going to drop a spoiler here, but it is 15 years old. So his wife passes away in childbirth, and so he has this daughter he's going to raise, but he ends up becoming an alcoholic. He ends up pushing her away, and his in-laws are the ones who take care of the child. And so later on in the series, there's this point where he comes back together with his daughter, and she basically forgives him for abandoning her. And then at the same point in the story, he's also forgiving his dad for and understanding like the struggles that he went through having to raise him on his own and how much his dad loved him but just couldn't do it, right? And the amount of grace that abounds in just these scenes always hits me because I automatically think about God. I think about the prodigal son. I think about my failures and how much God is running after us, chasing after us, and ready to forgive us despite all the many terrible things we've done and all the pain we have in our past. We can still move forward because we have God's grace. So I'm tearing up thinking about it. It's the only anime that's ever made me cry, but every time I watch it, it does it. So maybe I shouldn't have brought this one up, but yeah. So that one continues to move me. I love talking about it. Whenever the discourse comes up on Twitter, I'm like, I'm jumping in. I'm going to talk about this series. So absolutely, that's a big one.
And I'm sure that that wasn't a consideration when they wrote it, but when you were speaking about just thinking about in the Bible about like the generational curses that happened from like even when you think of Abraham, patriarch of the faith, one of the Mount Rushmore people,
Yeah.
and he had a very specific sinful thing that he did when he went places with his beautiful wife and would pretend that she was a sister. Very anime, right?
Yeah,
My
actually, yeah.
sister, and then Isaac, his son, did the exact same thing. Could not have known his father even did that. He wasn't born
Yeah.
yet. Unless
Mhm.
Abraham was like, look, I totally have a great cheat for you. If you
Yeah,
ever happen to be in Philistia, this works.
yeah.
So I look at that and I think, what a powerful way to demonstrate not just the aspect of generational curses, but the breaking of
Yeah.
those and the way that that can be broken through the power of forgiveness and repentance and those things. Incredible biblical theme. So there's so much depth to that, and that makes me wonder, like, there is a perception within the church. You mentioned it before. With finding God in video games, we deal with that a lot. As a matter of fact, the most difficulty we've ever faced, the harshest comments we've ever faced, came from church people. Are like, you're playing with strange fire. I'm like, well,
Mhm.
first of all, why do you have that voice? That's just a very strange voice. That's just my interpretation of it.
Right,
But
yeah.
then, secondly, it's like, wow, we're just trying to get Bible verses to people that would have never read them and maybe connect them to a story that they didn't know was in there. But I know that anime suffers from a very similar stigma that's associated with being a fan and being an otaku and balancing that with Christianity at the same time. So your ministry is predicated on that very careful fault line. So you mentioned that, within the body of Christ, that you're still navigating in this. How did you navigate the perception of those around you to not only see this and but embrace it and understand this is legitimate ministry that you're doing for people that would not have been reached by traditional, oh, here's some books on the Bible that I think you should read to help you understand the Bible that you chose not to read in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think I've been helped a couple of ways. One is that I think with our um, uh, I was attending a church that, though the very conservative in its outlook, for many years I was attending this church. The pastor was very open to what I was doing, and we had classes we taught, and I had this idea. I can't see it behind me, but there's one of those books over there is this little Bible study on a specific anime that that kind of deals with a version of the afterlife. And so I was like, I want to use this and teach a class, and at the same time, as we examine this anime, talk about how we view media and how we should be consuming it and how we should be looking at it. He was like, "Sounds great." I was like, "Really? Okay, I'll go with that then." I've just been very blessed by gracious people around me for the most part. But like you said, I would say the majority of the people that really come down on us are from inside the church, and that's tough for me because I'm kind of like I feel like I practice the least amount of grace with the church. I have trouble loving the church. It's I go through stages. He may watch this, but I just unmuted someone that the first person I ever like. I was like, I'm blocking you. I'm letting you know this because this is really kind of really hurting me right now, and I can't process this really well, and I'm kind of taking out my family. I'm so frustrated. And I finally, after a year, have unmuted him, and he's still blocked on one platform, but me unmuted him on another, so I can start responding to him a little bit. And he's in the church, and so I try to look, I try to look at this when my blinders are off and when like I'm in a good place. Is these are opportunities also to show grace and to love the church. And maybe my challenge is because I get the passion for anime, right? Maybe my challenge isn't as much loving the non-Christians or in anime, but loving the church people who don't get it or who do get it, but they want
Oh,
it a certain way.
mm. No, that's really powerful, and I think that's an aspect for myself that sometimes I have to push through as well. And the temptation is to immediately become that exact same keyboard jockey that I'm battling in that moment. I have to remind
Mhm,
myself we were
mhm.
called to be peacemakers, not
Yeah,
peacekeepers, and there's a massive
right.
difference with that. Peacekeeping's easy. You
Mhm,
don't start none, don't won't be none.
mhm.
Like that's easy for a lot of us, but actually making peace when someone is presenting that opposite side of it and being able to compassionately display it. I think of when Jesus was with his followers and they said, well, there's some people over there and they're casting out devils in your name, but they're not part of us,
Mhm.
so should we stop them? And Jesus was like, no, no, they're on our side. Like we
Yeah.
should be happy that we have someone fighting battles that we're not going to be fighting. We have a
Mhm.
different path. We are heading a very specific direction. Our end game is Jerusalem, and they are going a different direction, and they're going to solve different problems than we will. And that's the beauty of seeing each of us pursuing this through our fandoms.
And
Is
it's super exciting to me. Yeah, it's super exciting how this, especially video game ministry, how it is just taken off. Folks like yourself, and what's really, I mean, what's most exciting to me is you just have this audience, this huge audience that loves video games. And as we all know, we're all dying for Christ. We're all in such need. And now this group is being reached, right? And there's so many people who want to do it, sometimes overzealously. And you see some folks out there, but then there are a lot of folks who are approaching it with thought and prayer and and scripture and kind of and a lot of compassion, right? So it really just excites me that this huge group that was really not ministered to for many years, because nerds are nerds have been around for a long time. I mean, I'm wearing Star Wars, I'm thinking 1977, right? So like we've been around forever, right? but people have flat out rejected us. Sometimes the church has flat out rejected, not if not us, what we like, which makes it feel like we've been rejected.
Absolutely.
Now there are people that are like, "No, we love you guys. Come over here. Let's get on Twitch. Let's get on a stream. Let's play some games. Let's do some videos together." And you know, as I do this, I'm going to show you why I'm really excited and happy about what I'm doing.
I think it's so important that we can show that balance of being able to be authentically
Yeah,
fans while showing that that can also it coexist with a passion for Christ that doesn't feel odd or that we're
yeah,
all right. And now, as soon as I go to church, I shut that side of myself off and I grab a hymnal and I become a different human being, which I think is a part of the rejection from those who aren't in the faith. Is well, how do you walk through the doors and still be you? And what you're doing is being able to show, no, when I walk through the doors, I'm still a fan of anime all the way up until this place. He's going to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant and fan of anime." Like it's all going to be in there. It's not going to be just a component of it. It's all one major piece. I think that's really powerful and helps us understand the way that the church should be, which is embracing
yeah,
of the person who's coming in, inclusive of those passions and those drives, because
yeah,
they're not necessarily antithetical to the pursuit of Christ. You're showing that they're beneath the tangles.
yeah.
So I would like to know, when you're obviously a huge fan of a massive amount of anime,
Mhm.
who's the character that you find the most relatable for your journey? I'm assuming it's not the abusive alcoholic guy that you spoke about earlier. If that is, we can pray about that in a second.
You're right.
So who's the most relatable character that you found that you're maybe not 100% of their journey, but you're like, this particular anime for me hit home in a very personal way.
Mm. So yeah, so that's a really great question. My answer would have been Tomoya, who's the one who lost his wife and everything, um, just because of the past struggles and feeling like as a failure as a parent, things of that nature. But I will mention kind of a recent very popular anime called Frieren, which might appeal to your fans. It's a fantasy series and really takes a lot of its lore, I think, really from Lord of the Rings. So it kind of fits in that kind of type of high fantasy types of genre, and it's really become well beloved in a very short amount of time. But she's a character who I think a lot of us might relate to. She's not because she lives for thousands of years, but because like I think a lot of the relationships she didn't invest in them. So the kind of the model of the story is there's really kind of two timelines. There is the timeline from 50-ish years ago when she was with a band of heroes that defeated the Demon King, right? And then there's the current timeline. And what happens is kind of in between she's always just journeyed on her own and done her own thing, and then for a very short amount of time, in her eyes, 10 years, right, she comes with this group of heroes, they overthrow the king, and then she goes her own way, and then she reunites with them years later at the end of their lives. And one of them, the main hero, he passes away. And there's this great scene in the first episode where she's very stoic, very not emotional, where she starts crying and she's like, "Why didn't I get to know him better? Like I knew that humans only lived a short amount of time. Why didn't I get to know him better?" And so her life has changed because of her failure, because at this point she's like, all the things I learned from him, I need to start putting in emotion. I need to start caring about people and changing people's lives. And it's really easy to make that kind of analogy to the hero as Christ, right? As someone who died for the world, who showed us the way, who impacts us, and while this hero doesn't leave an actual spirit, we have the Holy Spirit to guide us along the way. We have Himmel's the hero's lessons are only in her brain, but we have the scripture to know how we need to live and the things that we need to be implementing in our lives. So I definitely feel that with Fear and like, oh, sometimes I may feel too tired to invest in a relationship. I'm like a lot of nerds out there. I'd rather stay at home, watch anime, play a game. But it's like, you know what? I ought to go to small group. I ought to go out and have tea with someone. If someone's like, "Hey, you want to hang out?" Well, not really, because you have a lot of problems and I'm tired. But of course, that's not my response. My response is, yeah, brother, let's hang out and like, work through some stuff. So, and because of that, my life is so much more enriched because God, in that weird way that, if you obey me, it's actually going to be for your good, and your way is kind of destructive. So, so yeah, I think that's a pretty good example for my life.
Is, and, when you're speaking of that, I think a lot of times people that maybe are watching us and they're trying to pursue a ministry similar to this. They're taking their fandom, their passion, and it can be hard to try to balance. We all have real world jobs. On
Mhm.
top of that, we have the ministry that we're trying to build, and on top of that, we still have to live authentically with our families or for ourselves and with our friends, and not allow the ministry to overtake our actual real life mission out there as well. So how do you find the balance? You've obviously got this beneath the tangles, this massive ministry piece. You got your own life with family and such. But then you spoke to, I still got to make sure I find time for my personal devotion and those very personal interactions, the one-on-ones that you have to allow that opportunity to happen in the moment.
Yeah, no, that I think that's super important. There was a time where I got burnt out, and I actually left the ministry into other people's hands, and I thought I'd walked away from it permanently. And then about a year after that, God led me back to the ministry, and the three people I left it with, they were ready to leave. So the intersection worked really well, and in that year, there was a lot of transformation that happened in ministry. So God had planned all that. But I think one thing that I've that's been really hard for me to accept over the years, but I've really embraced over the last year or two. So we've been doing this for 14 years now. But it's really only the last year or two that I've finally learned a lesson, which is that God is in control, And if I don't get that piece of content out, what do I think? Like, God's not going to save someone because I didn't write a piece of content. I mean, like, God is in
Facts.
control. I just need to be faithful. And sometimes, right? Faithfulness in serving him means understanding my limitations. It means, hey, I have family. I need to, tonight I'm not going to watch anime. Tonight I'm going to actually. Well, this may be not a good example because I love Lord of the Rings, but my daughter's been watching Lord of the Rings, so I was like, I guess I'll watch Return of the King tonight, So but something like that, right? Or I'll watch something I really don't want to watch, Taylor Swift or something like that, right?
There you
I'll
go.
do that, right? So or you know what? Today there's no Instagram post. It's okay. I have to take a breath and understand that God has this macro view of everything. He has a view of the future. He knows what he's doing, and I don't have to trust in my own abilities. I need to trust in him. And sometimes that means, just taking a little bit of a break as I need. And we instituted for our staff a fast last year. Because we all kind of felt it. We were kind of doing too much, and people were starting to snap at each other a little bit. It's like, hey, this is not like us. Hey, let's take a break, and for the next week here, definitely just put everything down, breathe, pray, fast if you want. We're going to do that. We're going to step away, and we're going to tell our audience that too, because maybe that's a way of telling them too. Hey, maybe this is what we're doing this for, and God is in control, and maybe you guys need to do something like this in your lives too. So it was a really good practice for us.
I love that. It's taking time to deliberately make room to be the Mary instead of the Martha in your
Yeah.
life. And it can be hard, because Martha didn't do what she was doing because she didn't love Jesus. Like, she loved Jesus and she was showing it in a very specific way. But Jesus said, give Mary permission to do the best thing. The best thing right now, just sit here and be with me. You're not always going to have this. I think about that with my little ones all the time. I'm like, I
Mhm.
won't always have this though. So yeah, like you said, I think I love that you said, you gave yourself permission to say, today, the Lord will use somebody to say, I don't have to post this today. He's still going to be faithful. My faithfulness right now is to be a Mary and sit at his feet. And,
Yeah, I
and
think that's funny. I think that's funny. The idea of faith, we think it's always doing, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes faith is letting go, right? Like remember that God knows so much more than you do. It's okay to just let go and let God, right? As they say, right? So that's
I was just
that's hard
talking to
for
my
some
wife
of us who are
about
just
that yesterday. That
mm,
I was learning that, a lot of times faith means doing nothing, and
mhm,
that's the hardest thing
that's
to
hard.
do of all. I was thinking about that when I was, we just went through, everything to do with Christ's resurrection. I'm like, all the disciples really had to do for 3 days was nothing. They
Right.
just had to do nothing. He was doing it all. Like, all they literally had to do was
Mm.
just wait. He was going
Mhm.
to handle all of it. They had nowhere. They didn't need to go and start greasing the sides of the rock around the
Right.
tomb or something, or try to
Yeah.
get the Roman guards to go do
Mhm.
something else. Like, all they had to do was nothing. And
Mhm.
that was what Jesus had asked him to do. Now, granted, after that, he asked him to do a lot of things, but in that moment, the most
Yeah.
powerful thing they could do was nothing.
Absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that. So, as we wrap up here, I just want to make sure, we obviously have an audience that may be learning about you for the first time. Where do we find Beneath the Tangles? Where do we follow you? What can we do to get to hear all of these incredible things you're putting together when you're back to being Martha?
Yeah, no, I would say it's kind of what your taste is. We do a little bit of different things on every platform. The place where I like people to connect with us most is on our Discord server. Um and that's kind of where we finally get down to the community that I've been praying for all these years, right? People are chatting with each other, people are watching stuff with each other. We have small groups that run through it as well. So it's a wonderful community. And if anyone wants an invite to that, just send me an email, which is beneath.the.tangles@gmail.com. Our website's beneath-the-tangles.com. That's where our articles are. We do a lot of fun stuff. We did a Annie March Madness through the month of March, which was our tournament to determine the best anime, which was Frieren. So I recommend people check that one out. But we do like our more analysis pieces too. And then right now we're doing our first impression pieces. It's the spring anime season has begun, so we're giving our thoughts on every anime that comes out. So it's a fun place to read stuff. But then we're on all the social media places too, either at Beneath the Tangles or at Anime Tangles. So that's Instagram, Twitter, Mastodon, YouTube, TikTok, all over the place. And we mostly do fun stuff there. Sometimes it feels like we're beating someone over the head if we do like the Christian messages in the kind of like caption stuff, which actually led to someone coming to Christ through through us at one point. So sometimes it's you may see it and be like, oh, it's just anime, it's not Christian related, but we're very open with our faith as we talk about stuff, and then we are more focused on faith in kind of the Discord setting as opposed to some of the others. But connect with us wherever, and we're happy to chat with y'all.
Thank you so much. It was an honor and a privilege to get to sit down with you today
No,
and
yeah,
spend this
I'm
time.
happy to be with you.
You have a powerful and incredible ministry, and we just so happy to get a chance to share and shed a spotlight on what you're doing with Beneath the Tangles for all the fans of anime, all the otakus around the world. So thank you very much. This was our Finding God in Video Games Ministry Spotlight with Beneath the Tangles.